let's jump to it without any further ado and speak to the wonderful political correspondent for The Spectator, James Hill. Good morning, James.
Morning, Alex.
How are you?
I'm good. Not as chipper as you in the face of Armageddon, but I'm still all right. Thank you very much.
I love that, in the face. I think that's why I'm actually deliriously happy, because I've read the runes and they ain't pretty. We're in big trouble. So let's talk about that, shall we? Trump has been accused of World War II-style appeasement, and MPs are warning Britain must be ready to go to war with Russia. Well, we've heard this already before, but let's unpack some of this conversation, these arguments taking place around the edges of the Munich Security Conference. What we do know, right, is that Trump has had a long telephone conversation with Putin. He said he was going to, and all hell's broken loose ever since. Tell us more.
Yes, so this was on Wednesday evening. The President of America and the President of Russia both spoke together, and that really threw Europe into a bit of chaos, because it's all about this conference setting up the plan for Ukraine and the peace negotiations. And some Europeans quite rightly said, hang on a sec, we want to give Ukraine the strongest negotiating position, therefore it seems mad to sort of take away their strongest cards. Those are about what borders the Ukrainians are going to accept. Is it going to be pre-2014 or post-2014? And also about having the pledge to join NATO. Taking those off the table so early on would potentially hinder the efforts. And then we see last night, Alex, that Pete Hesketh, who was the Defence Secretary, made some comments on this, has now had to walk back some of those comments. Right. So it's a kind of classic Trumpian style. What does he mean exactly? He's blowing hard one area, taking back the other. So I think it all tees it up nicely, but I do think there's going to be some kind of negotiation. And to be frank, I mean, it was always going to be the case, given how much money America gives, the Americans were always going to be the one who sort of well, they were the ones who made the decision on this, I'd say.
Right, and you know what? That doesn't surprise me, because what really is getting on my nerves, listening to all these hand-wringing moaners over in Munich, is they created this problem in the first place. It's all very well Olaf Scholz saying, well, you probably shouldn't sit down and offer things to Putin. It's like, excuse me? When Russia invaded Ukraine, they were still wanting to build Nord Stream 2. They were saying you can't send German weapons that have been sold to the Czech Republic cannot be sent to Russia. Russia, just got away with murder, frankly, in the first 6 weeks of that invasion, because the EU were deciding what they wanted to do. Are they going to apply sanctions? Are they going to allow weapons this? The UK was the only one who said, right, we got to get in there and try and prevent this from happening. And so this has now dragged on for a long time. And yet again, Europe is saying, oh, well, you can't go too hard against Putin because he might use a nuclear weapon. Oh, you can't talk to him. Oh, if you back him into corner, he fights like a rat. Oh, God, America, please come and help us. Please help us. Please help us. We've not spent anything on our defence. And then as soon as Donald Trump wades in and goes, right, come on, guys, I've got this. I can't believe you're doing that. I can't believe you're speaking to him. I remember Emmanuel Macron sitting around that oversized giant white table in the Kremlin thinking he was toast of the town.
You're completely spot on, Alex. And I think, look, I think you can make 2 points. One of which is, I think, the way in which Trump has gone about this is the wrong way of negotiation. But the other, as you completely say, is the Europeans have had years to prepare for this. I mean, how many times do you have to have a wake-up call before you realise that the patient is brain dead? These are just a number of different times when the Europeans, they were told in 2016, told in 2020, told in 2022, when, of course, Ukraine was invaded, and actually have repeatedly not taken this seriously and not rearmed. And, here in the UK, we have a good record on Ukraine. We were helping them, train them for years after 2014. But it is a tragedy, I think, that still there are many people in Whitehall who don't seem to take the need to rearm seriously. And that's why we're still having this debate around 2 to 2.5%, when really it should be closer to 3%, which is what it closer was during the Cold War.
Right. And actually, if you look statistically, you look at America, a population of about 340 million people. You look at just the European member states of NATO, which are basically the EU member states and the UK, population of about 500 million. And yet we're not coughing up half of, anywhere near what America's coughing up. And yet most of the action, most of the hubbub is happening in Europe. NATO is set up as an alliance to defend largely Europe after the Second World War. And there seems to be a lot of mudslinging. The other thing I find utterly incredulous is now people are going, oh, well, you can't just take Crimea off the table. Hold on. Trump wasn't even remotely in politics in 2014 when Obama and European leaders said to Putin, yeah, you can have Crimea. Don't you worry about that. Now, all of a sudden, some sort of condition for the end of this war is Putin giving up Crimea. Frankly, it's for the birds. I also remember at the outbreak of invasion, all of the various armchair commentators and experts and, military leaders saying, well, you've got to build Putin a golden bridge. Trump's gone, do you know what? I get this, man. I know his ego. I'm going to say to him, listen, Vlad, mate, this war's stupid. You're wasting money. They're wasting money. Get this done. We're going to finish it. You can then, if you play nicely, come back into the G7 ego stroke. And everyone's like, oh, you can't do that. I mean, I don't understand when we don't know the details of this deal. It's been one conversation and it isn't a deal. The deal's not done until the deal's done. Why everyone is kicking off as if it's something finalised.
I think that's a good point, which is that, how Trump does do these deals is that there's a lot of talk sometimes and negotiation, counter-negotiation. It can be about feeling them out as well. I also think that on your first point as well, Alex, about Europeans have basically enjoyed for many decades now generous welfare states which have been paid for through American taxpayer largesse. And let's be frank, a lot of the Continentals have been quite smug about that fact and saying, we don't need to spend it. That is basically because the American military presence has been there, and there have been warning signs for a while, and Europe should have taken this seriously. I suspect we may end up in a situation what we had between 1945 and 1990, if you remember, when the French and the UK and the Americans all were occupying parts of West Germany. And that could be a situation where we happen in Ukraine, where we end up having some kind of NATO presence provided by European countries. But I think the warning signs need to be there. And also Europe should be very aware, of course, that there's another great power on the scene, which is China. And so the Americans have been saying for years they're very much more concerned about China than they are about Europe. And I think, frankly, this should have been done yesterday. And if we can't do it today, we ought to do it before tomorrow.
Right, it'd be a good idea if at that security meeting they discuss open borders as well, but I doubt that's going to be on the table. Let's talk about Rachel Reeves and this. I mean, what is going on here? You explain to me, because it seems to me they're now saying, oh, nothing happened, there was no fiddling of the expenses, this is all made up. And the BBC is saying, we've got the receipts.
Yeah, so there's two different dimensions to this. This all concerns Rachel Reeves' pre-2010 career, one of which is about the length of time she spent at the Bank of England, and that's obviously been about her claims on the CV. Those claims on the CV have now been revised twice, once when the initial Guido Fawkes story went out last year, now a second time with the BBC's been reporting this week. So that's an embarrassment, I'd say, about sort of exaggeration of CV claims or not getting things right. The second point is about the allegation that she was investigating at HBOS for potential expense claims. The BBC established that an investigation did take place, but they cannot find out what the conclusion of that investigation was. Obviously, all everyone on Labour will say is that this shows that actually nothing's been gone wrong. They can't prove anything. But it is worth noting, I think, that she was left in a settlement, I believe, according to the BBC reporting, whereby lawyers were involved. And I would suggest that a middle manager at a provincial bank doesn't tend to get that. There's never normally a good sign if the lawyers are involved. But it all adds to this idea about Rachel Reeves is how credible is she? Because she came into politics. She said, I've did 10 years at the Bank of England. She hadn't. She said, I've worked as a banker before. She left in a difficult situation, it seems. And it now leads to people also talking about her and also conflating that with the line she's heard in Parliament, which is that she's sort of Rachel from accounts. And the idea, of course, she was meant to be the Iron Chancellor. She's ending up being considered a bit of a figure of ridicule. And I think that given the dire straits she finds herself in ahead of that March 26th OBR budget forecast, she's in a really difficult position. And the danger is, of course, Norman Lamont was the devalued Prime Minister of the devalued government, he said, of John Major. This is the overhyped Chancellor of an overhyped government, I'd say.
Yeah, I mean, do you think, given that there's a little bit of internecine warfare here, that perhaps there are people in the Labour Party who think with Rachel Reeves gone and out of the way, it might allow Starmer to make some U-turns? He doesn't seem to be a man who likes admitting he's wrong. He seems extremely intransigent. But actually, if he's got a fall guy or a fall woman, it might enable him to start unpicking some of the stuff that's been vastly unpopular that we know isn't working. I mean, just reports out today from local councils saying if you carry on with this national insurance increase on employers, that includes us, we've got to pay that and we're going to go bust. I mean, they've made some absolutely glaring mistakes that at some point Starmer's going to have to confess to, and the easiest way of doing this, as we know, is having the scapegoat.
I think that Keir Starmer has very little interest in economic policy. From talking to people in and around government, they say that he's much more interested in, say, chairing the Foreign Affairs Committee, much more involved in the summits than he is about economic policy. I think that in the short term, if Rachel Reeves was to go, that would put Keir Starmer himself he would be in danger, his political position, and people will be saying, hang on a sec, you had the budget, why wasn't number 10 holding number 11 to account? Why weren't you asking the difficult questions and all of this? So I think that Rachel Reeves will be there, but I think the question is about how much of the government's credibility is tied to her own personal reputation, which is now taking such a hit. And I think the other thing to say, of course, is most Labour MPs I spoke to yesterday, they were pretty in support of Rachel Reeves. A couple of them described this story as a witch hunt. But I do think a couple on the left of the party are saying, hang on a sec, let's not forget that talk about sort of fraud in a previous life was something that did for Louise Haigh, the Transport Secretary, not so long ago. Is there a perception, perhaps, that Keir Starmer handles those so-called mates of his, people he's close to in Cabinet and Minister, differently to how he treats others? And that will be something longer term to watch out for as well.
Let's talk about credibility. Let's talk about the credibility of a Ghanaian tourist who was granted the right to live in Britain under Brexit marriage rules, even though she didn't attend her own wedding. It's ridiculous. Francisca Boateng, 42, won an immigration appeal after claiming that her proxy marriage to a German citizen living in Britain had lasted long enough to qualify for her to remain in the UK. She came on holiday to Britain where she met a German called Fatau Sualihu. Yeah, he sounds deeply Germanic to me. Before returning home to divorce her husband. She organised a proxy wedding in Kumasi in Ghana. I know Kumasi well. In December 2018, that neither she nor her new husband attended. And yet she's allowed to stay. That's mad.
Absolutely, and I think that this is just one of a drumbeat of stories we've seen in recent days. The Telegraph is doing a big look at immigration tribunals, and one thing that keeps coming up again and again is the right to a family life under the ECHR and Human Rights Act. And it seems increasingly this has been expanded, this definition. People are increasingly looking at these cases and seeing how the horrifying details, some of them, they're either illogical, as you've just highlighted in that case there, or they're perverse, whereby you have, for instance, a Pakistani paedophile this week refused to be deported on the grounds that it would hurt his family life. I mean, the jokes write themselves. It's tragic. And so I do think this is going to be one of those areas, Alex, where we need to see investigation either by this Labour government or potentially a future centre-right reform Tory government of some kind.
Oh, we need some drastic policy when it comes to immigration, both legal and legal. James Heal, thank you ever so much. You know, the thing that really gets my goat, all these people gaming the system, trying to stay in the UK, when the proverbial hits the fan here in Britain, as it will at some point, whether it be civil unrest or whether it be going to war with Russia or whatnot, these people aren't going to stick around and help us. They're not going to be going, we love Britain, we're going to help defend Britain. We fought so hard and took taxpayers' money to have lawyers to make sure that we can stay here. They'll be the first people back on the plane to Kumasi. That's what gets my goat. They don't have loyalty here. Why should we have loyalty to them?